Okay, hello everybody. This is Tom Puglisi from Infragistics. I'm a technical evangelist here. I'm also hanging out with Jason Beres. Also, Jason Beres here in Infragistics. We're going to go over what's new in the Infragistics Net Advantage Windows Forms toolset for the 2013 Volume 1 release. So as you know, we release 2 versions of our products per year, and this is the first release of 2013. So let's check out what we've added for Windows Forms. By the way, we're actually recording this meeting, so if you have a bunch of friends that couldn't make it or missed out on this demo, or if you want to just watch this over again or even send this information to management or your other employees or friends or whatever, feel free to share the link. We'll get you the link afterwards. So don't worry, it's being recorded. And let's all cross our fingers that the technology works for the recording. All right. By the way, Jason Beres is VP Product Management. That's his email address. He leads a large team of people that includes engineering, product managers, all the researchers that get data from customers, and all the homework that he does to put all this great stuff into the product. I mean, where do we get all these ideas from? We don't just come up with them on our own. We get them from customers like you guys. So make sure to be interactive with us. Brian Lagunas is the specific product manager for our WPF products as well as our Windows Forms products. He's very responsive, so get in touch with him if you have any feedback, questions, or comments. And me, Tom Puglisi, I'm the technical evangelist. I will work with you guys. I work with sales to show the technical aspect of our products and how it can help you be successful in building the most awesome apps. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to talk about is that we have a large customer base for our Windows Forms product. So if you're working with Windows Forms stuff and you're thinking, wow, am I the only one? No, you're not. There's a lot of Windows Forms customers out there, and we still add stuff to our Windows Forms product. So don't feel that you're working on an older technology. There's a lot of people still using it. So those that have been working with WinGrid, as well as a bunch of the other controls in our Windows Forms toolset, we've added a lot of cool features. So let's check out, starting out with WinGrid. So if any of you guys implement the iDataErrorInfo interface on your business objects, which is pretty much a simple interface that if you try to assign property values that violate your validation constraints, and that logic is on the object level, WinGrid has a feature that will take your error string that is within your business object, not in the control, and it'll show it whenever there's an error that violates your constraints. Well, you can pretty much customize that even further. We've updated the APIs so that you can pretty much change the error message that comes from your business object to say whatever you like, essentially. So, and again, there's a lot of people, I'm assuming there's a lot of customers that have played with the Infragistics Windows Forms stuff for many years, but again, there's also new customers. And how do I know that? Well, I talk to a lot of customers that end up buying the Windows Forms product. So there's a lot of reasons why. So what I wanted to say is that Infragistics comes out with many different types of UI or visual-based additions and updates to our controls, as well as API updates to these controls. So a lot of times, the cool thing that I've done as a developer is whenever something new comes out that allows me to throw out my own code and replace it with property settings that are just part of the control set, I think that's wonderful because it's the code I could eliminate out of my responsibility and just set a property or handle an event that Infragistics now provides. The other thing that we've added, the grid has a feature that when enabled, it shows a bunch of empty rows that are not really interactive, and this is just a feature that people have wanted. So we've had that feature for a while. We've added the Infragistics famous appearance objects to that empty row feature so that now you can fully style the empty rows to look like however you want. Now, when I say appearance objects, some people will say, well, what is that? Think of an appearance object as an actual object that has a bunch of properties related to appearance, like back color, fore color, back color 2, gradient style, H align for text, vertical align for text, so horizontal, vertical, text align, image, background image, foreground image, a bunch of properties. And I'm spitting out a lot of property names, but once you learn this one object, it's on almost every single part of our individual controls elements, like the headers, the cells, and every other Windows Forms controls that Infragistics makes, not only just for the individual elements, but for elements represented under different states, like the cell when it's in edit mode, the cell when it's sorted, the cell when it's in 20 other modes. So there's appearance objects all over the place. And we've also updated and expanded the hot track appearance. So whenever you move your mouse over the various elements on the grid, we've updated the hot tracking so that columns and row selectors can be styled using the appearance objects that I just talked about. Excel exporter. So again, now we're going over to this other element that we have, or this other component. It's pretty much an API library, a class library that's at the core of a component that we have called the WinGrid Excel exporter. But I'm going to talk about the core APIs, and I'll explain how that works along with the Excel exporter. We pretty much added a feature that I can explain very simply. If you have a drop-down list in the WinGrid, so in other words, one of the columns of the WinGrid or many columns, you have it associated with a drop-down list, such as when you click on it, you have a drop-down list of values. Well, that will get exported as a drop-down list in Excel. So in the past, I've actually built something like this where before the export started, I would find out if there's a cell that had multi-column drop-down of whatever, and then I would use the actual Excel API that's created by Infragistics. So in other words, the Excel class library that has a bunch of objects and methods and a bunch of things that you can use to create Excel files in memory and then dump them out to a stream or to the disk or whatever you want. I could do that before, but with a bunch of code, because the Excel library did have the ability to create drop-down lists within the actual APIs. But guess what? Infragistics now made that easier. If you have a list in the grid and you export it using the exporter, it comes out like magic. So that's what we've done for you. I could go back to the apps that I've done this and delete all that code and just, and leave it the way it is, and it'll automatically do that for me. Here's an image of that. By the way, I'm going to go through a couple of slides, so if you don't like slides, just hang out with me for a little while, and then I'll show you some samples, and I'll show you some Visual Studio too. So don't think it's all slides, so don't worry. The Gantt control, or the Gantt view. So we have a Gantt control. We've added some enhancements. It's better off if I show you the sample of this because it's a little hard to explain just with words and pictures. But to translate all this in English, there's several different permutations of task working hour mode and duration and task positioning and task increments. So as you notice from this image, these are various variables, we could call them, I guess, that represent different time units, how they're known, how they're marked as far as increments, as well as how they're displayed in increments. So the Gantt control as a whole has two sections. It has a grid component, which is on the left-hand side in this picture, and a chart component, which is on the right-hand side. And it's, again, one control. It's just two components all in one. And then you can specify the duration for each one of these tasks, and then that will show up as a drawn line, whether it's milestones or task overall or overarching line that has milestones start and end, or the actual individual tasks underneath. They will show up and become lengthened according to the unit of measure that you choose. So I'll explain, and again, I'll pretty much show this in an interactive example because I could talk for an hour and it still sounds confusing with this, so I will show this to you. Okay, so the combo editor. This is the control that has a drop-down list of values, and you can use it as a standalone element or control on the form, or you can throw it into the WinGrid. So pretty much what we've done is, remember the good old appearance object that I spent a little time on before talking about? We've stuck one of those onto the matched characters that show up whenever you're typing. So in other words, if you have the suggest mode enabled, like Google Suggest or Facebook, or basically anything that's a drop-down out there, if I actually type into something that's a drop-down and I don't get suggest on any kind of app out there, I think something's broken, or I think my internet connection is broken. But anyway, the combo has the auto-suggest feature. We've slapped the appearance object on the matching characters. So what can you do with the appearance object? Pretty much what I said before: back color, fore color, font styling, all that stuff. And whatever characters match what you're typing, they get that appearance style. So you can make it look as beautiful or as ugly as your imagination can come up with. So that's how that one works. All right, the Win Desktop Alert. Here's an example of one I talked about earlier, where Infragistics also does lots of API improvements throughout our various product releases. Nothing visual was gained with this control. So by the way, what's the Desktop Alert? That's that little pop-up that you can use. Like, for example, when you have an Outlook mail and you have a little pop-up that shows up, or if people still use MSN Messenger, you can get a little square thing that pops up, like a little toaster that pops up on one of the corners of your screen. That's the control you can use to get that effect on your user interface. We've added an API enhancement that pretty much exposes a collection of pop-ups, and you can pretty much use this API to iterate through them, or to flip through them and do something, or position them. So it's up to you what you want to do. It's just you now have the ability to access the collection of items that was not there before. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a great implementation of that. You could also probably do something if you want to be annoying, like when you do have 20 of them, you can have another pop-up that says, "Would you like to arrange these now?" And you click on that, and then iterate through them and position them sequentially. Yeah, nice. Yeah, and as I was saying before, Jason and his team of product managers, they talk to a lot of different customers. They visit customers, and get all different types of understandings, use cases, and they pretty much have a very large knowledge base of what people want to do with controls, as well as we work very closely with Infragistics' own interaction design and user experience division, where we have people that we're not just only creating controls that do what people want. We're also innovating as well. So you're going to find a lot of controls in these tool sets that are latest UI metaphors. You'll find them on really highly advanced applications out there. We build these controls too, and you could infragisticize your apps and use these controls and have the latest thing out there. That's why it's always good to stay up with the subscriptions, because you're always getting these latest controls. And not to mention all these other new technologies. I know this is a Windows Forms demo, but you have all these other technologies that people are building on. So you want to be able to get your apps out there everywhere. This is not like, like the early 2000s where it's just, Windows and VB6 and you're good to go. Now it's like devices, web, small devices, large devices. Yeah, now it's going to be watches and earrings next, right? Will this work on my earring OS? If that ever comes out. Okay, so this other control, the Win Day View. So now we're going to the scheduling components. So Infragistics has a bunch of Outlook-styled or Outlook-like scheduling components that have calendars, a day's worth of events in the day view, a month's worth of events in the month view, maybe a week's worth of events in the week view. So there's a bunch of different calendar controls that are part of what we call the Win Schedule series of components that are all in the Net Advantage Windows Forms control set. We pretty much added an enhancement, these two little circles that we have here. Essentially, if you have a bunch of events that are taking place, you get these little scroll bars, and when you click on them, it'll flip through the different tasks or the different appointments that are there. Oh, so in other words, so you had 16 event limit before. So if I wanted to build an app that represented a typical day in my life in Infragistics, I wouldn't be able to use the control. But now I can. Okay, great. Gotcha. That's great. Yeah. Now here's a very important thing. I tried to save this part towards the end of the slide deck because this is very important. Yes, this is Windows Forms, but guess what? There's devices out there that have touch support now, and it's possible that your Windows Forms applications will end up running in a device that has touch capabilities. If you know Brian Lagunas that I mentioned earlier, he was doing a review on this huge monitor that he got that has touch support. Yeah, the planner one, right? And now that thing is, what if you run a Windows Forms app on there? Guess what? It has touch capabilities. You want your Windows Forms apps to work in that scenario as well. So Infragistics has done work in that area as well. And by the way, and for the veterans out there, that the Infragistics Windows Forms veterans that have built many apps, if you guys have you ever used the ink provider, which essentially is a component that you throw it onto the form, and if your application happens to be running in one of those older styled tablets with ink stylus support, like the Microsoft tablet PC, like those older guys. Well, if you understand how that concept works, that's exactly how this new touch and gesture support works with our Windows Forms controls. It's a component that you throw onto the form, and any touch-capable Infragistics control that's on your form already will automatically transform itself, changing the various individual UI elements that they're composed of so that they're bigger and they're more touch-friendly. I'll show you an example of that in Visual Studio, how easy that is. And here's a couple of screenshots of the various controls that do have touch support. Now, if there's a control that's not listed in here, you can always change properties on the control itself. In the event, you happen to be using a control in a way that's not really, that we haven't come up with in this first version of touch support, you can always change property settings on that as well. So this essentially is the WinGrid control. Notice how the headers, the individual UI element icons on the headers, such as column hiding, column swapping, or filtering, and all those things all become bigger. And by the way, the other thing is, not only do we just make elements bigger, we also add gesture support, such as swiping and things of that nature. Like there's accelerated movements and things like that as well. So we didn't just enlarge the UI elements and said, "Oh, we're done." So this is the Win tree control. So I have images here of the tree in its various modes with checkboxes or radio option buttons enabled. We also have the tree in its plain old simple form, which is just a plain old simple tree. We also have the tree with columns enabled. So remember, you can bind this tree to your data sources. So if you have data sets in there somewhere in your app, and you set the tree's data source property to your data set, it will pretty much render and iterate through recursively through your entire hierarchical data model, render columns as well as nodes. So while I'm on that topic, a lot of people say, well, it looks like your tree can do a lot of the same things that your grid can do. Should I use a tree or should I use the grid for binding to a hierarchical data model? Well, there's an answer for that. If you have a finite level of, let's say, schema-defined objects, so let me translate that. If you have a collection of objects and each object in the collection has the same schema, no matter what level it's in. So for example, if I go to levels, like the first level, it's a customer object with customer ID, first name, last name. Next, I drill down into that data model. The next level deep, it's now an order. There's an order ID. There's an, order date or whatever. But now if I go back to the root and then scroll down to 50 customers down, and then I open up his order, is that order going to have the same schema as the other order I mentioned before? Oh, it will? Then you should use the grid because you're at a finite level. No matter where you are in the collection, you're going to use the grid because the grid only supports the same schema for various levels. However, let's compare that to a different use case scenario. Let's say if I have a collection of objects where it's more like a tree-like data model where, oh, wow, I'm starting to see the connection, tree data model, tree UI control, wow. So let's say let's say if I go down to the first object, it's a customer, and I open up its child collection, and it happens to have an object that has a certain type of schema. But then I go back to the root and go down to the 50th object, and I open up its child collection, but that's a totally different schema. It could be something else, like an incidence collection or something. That's pretty much a data model that is not that it does not have the same schema no matter where you are in the collection. That's when you want to use the tree. All right, so let's check out the WinList view. So the WinList view, this is the one that pretty much mimics the control that you see and interact with most of the time in Windows Explorer. So this thing too has gained touch capabilities. All the items become bigger whenever you drag and drop the touch provider component onto the form. So here's one where I just want a real simple way of saying this. You know all the Infragistics controls that have tabs on them? Well, all of those tabs, no matter where they are, whether it's the tab itself, the tab strip, the tab control, the tabbed MDI, or any one of those controls has gained touch support, all just by dropping the touch provider component on there. And notice, if you can see towards the center of the screen, there's like this big bar that's kind of circled. That's pretty much the splitter. Whenever you create separate groups within your MDI application, so you have a top group and a bottom group, or even side to side, you get that splitter. Well, the splitter is also made larger. And of course, all the editor controls, well, the editors are the biggest thing that I would imagine I'll be touching. So those definitely got touch support. And that's pretty much implemented with making the text editor portion larger. So whenever you tap and touch it, that will fire up your device's default keyboard that shows up, and then it kind of removes focus onto that virtual keyboard that's on the screen. Then you type your stuff in, and then you close the keyboard, and then the values are automatically entered into the various editor controls. What's interesting? Look at this. If you can look towards the center of the screen, towards the right-hand column of images, you see that little pen icon? That's the ink provider. So it's possible you could have this running in an ink-enabled device that has touch as well. So that's a pretty cool combination that we have there. And when you touch the ink button, it pops up the PIP. I forgot what that stands for. The pen something. Pen input P something. I forgot. That was a long time ago. The pen input. Oh. Oh wow. Okay. And then you could. Wow. Then you can use the mouse to draw something like your signature. I can use the mouse. Yeah. Remember having fun. But, oh, okay, the pen input panel. That's the PIP. Yeah. I know it's called PIP. I know you need like the Microsoft Ink Provider V1.7 DLL or yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Cool. Think of solicit feedback from the chat. Think of your own what the acronym of PIP stands for and type it into the chat. Okay, so we're kind of getting close to the end of the slide deck. Let's check out a couple of other new, some smaller things. Infragistics still adds other, we add some smaller features here and there as well, towards the end of the cycle. But the activity indicator, that's that control that you can use as an animated indicator that something is processing, like a file is copying, or something's downloading, or something is exporting. Well, that control, we've added another property that allows you to specify text when there's no activity going on. So in this picture, where it says complete, that's the property in action. So if there's nothing going on, complete. So type whatever you want in there. The other thing that we've done is the mask editor control. So the mask editor, that's one that has been used very heavily by me and pretty much anyone out there that uses Infragistics editors. So just to be clear, all those editors that I showed you before, you should definitely be using them if you have our control set, because why write code to transform a plain old inbox text box to do whatever you want it to do when you can just use one of the Infragistics editors that pretty much has been developed 90% or 99% of the way to behave in such a way that it's specific for currency, email addresses, IP addresses, you know, anything else out there, you know, numerics, percents, dates. I mean, seriously, I remember writing code in the past before I even used Infragistics stuff, which is actually going back, wow, if I think about it, like 9 years. I've been here almost 9 years. Can you believe that? Yeah, well, you're here longer. Oh, wow, yeah. Yeah, wow. Yeah, we're here a long time. But again, I remember the good old days where you'd have to write a bunch of code to make a text box, like a Visual Studio text box, behave in ways that accepts my very specific type of input. When Infragistics control is already built to accept that input, the only thing you need to do is choose additional features like spin buttons, additional buttons that do things when you click on them, or min-max values and behaviors of what happens if it's null, what happens if there's a value that's outside of your range. So you should definitely be using those to not only make your data validation and garbage rejection more foolproof, but it's less work for us anyway. I mean, it's a win-win situation. So anyway, the mask editor is one of the ones I've used heavily, where you throw the editor onto the form, and then you provide an input mask. What is an input mask? It's pretty simple. It's just a string of characters where some characters represent types of data entry, and other characters can represent literals. For example, I could do like pound, 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 dash, pound, pound, dash, and a couple of other pounds. And I just created the Social Security, the USA Social Security input mask. And now I can't type anything but numbers in there. And then there's properties on there that allow you to get the complete text, including literals, or just the data value without the literals. So you should be using those editors. They're very flexible, and they're very helpful in getting you to build a bulletproof app. So the mask editor has been given new masks. Jason, off the top of your head, do you know which masks are added? I kind of forgot reading through them. Just a bunch of additional things that they added. I flipped through them quickly, and I kind of forgot them like last week or so. But yeah, we added new masks, so that way you can just select them, and then they're there. And again, you can always construct your own mask. We have a very helpful one-page topic that shows all of the characters and what they mean. And there's a lot of stuff, like you convert, like there's a character that you type in, which anything that you type will be automatically converted to uppercase or lowercase. So there's a lot of flexibility. And finally, last but not least, the label control. Yeah, we do have a label control. And a lot of times people say, why should I use this control? It's so small or whatever. Well, I'll tell you why. The appearance objects, that's why. So you think to yourself, well, it's just a label. I can use the inbox label. Well, just keep in mind that all the Infragistics controls have the appearance objects associated with them. Even if it's something as small or as seemingly insignificant as a label, keep in mind, because a lot of people out there are using the Infragistics application styling, and that's the framework that we've built into all of our Windows Forms controls that has a centralized and very high performance single instance styling framework that styles all of the controls, and it allows people that are not even developers to create styles and themes for your application. Guess what, Jason? It's demo time. Demo time, demo time. All right, let's do this. All right, so you should all still be seeing my screen. And let me actually, it's funny, my Windows Forms thing is showing up in the other window. It thinks I have another monitor hooked up. So anyway, I'm going to click my Start button, go to Programs, Infragistics, and you can see the stuff that I have installed here. So this is the new 2013.1 installation, and we're going to go to Windows Forms, and we're going to click on Samples. And by the way, keep in mind a couple of things while I'm at the Start menu. Always remember, like the Visual Studio Toolbox tools, we have a utility here right in Windows Forms, Create Visual Studio Toolbox tab. There's a lot of words in there, but translating this to a much shorter thing is create the tools in Visual Studio, create the tab for me. That's what that means. So I never have any problems with this, but if you go and run Visual Studio and you can't find the NetAdvantage 13.1 Windows Forms control, go here and run it. Make sure Visual Studio is shut down and run this and give it a few minutes and it will show up in there automatically. The other thing is, I wanted to show you, so App Stylist, that's what I talked about. It's an application that allows anybody to just create themes for all of the Windows Forms controls. The output from this is a file that can be shared across all of your apps. And let's go to the samples. So now I'm going to launch the Windows Forms samples local. That's this one right here, so click on it. Whenever I share my desktop, everything slows down. So, and remember, if you guys download this, you could always run them as well. So it'll be much faster on your machine when you're not sharing your desktop. So we've pretty much put everything that's new bundled together in this little section here. So let's take a look at some of these things. So let's look at the auto-suggest highlight appearance feature for the combo editor. All right, so here it is. Let me just make this a little bit bigger, make sure everyone sees everything. All right, so let's take a look real quick. I want to see what kind of text we have in here. Okay, so the values are down there. So if I just click on the drop-down, you see there's a couple of values in there, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, just like in the grid. So if I start typing M-O-N, we're going to get Monday, but see how M-O-N is bold. But let's start changing some stuff here, making it like crazy looking. So let's do like red and then this background. So now if I start typing that in, M-O-N, you start seeing the match that comes up. How's it look on your end, Jason? The web demo is looking good? Okay, good. Just want to make sure my audience out there can see it clearly. Sometimes it doesn't come out that clear. So again, have fun with this. It's a typical appearance object. Make it look however you like. As long as you don't make it look like how I just did. That looks a little ugly. The red strike through. That's that feature that was added. Close this guy out. Next thing I'll show, let me kind of jump to this one. The iData Error Info API enhancements. This will be an example of a grid that has a column that I'm going to delete a value or do something to the value. Okay, so this loads up. I'm going to reposition it so you can all see it clearly. All right, so let's see. The column that we want to look at here is, all right, so let me first delete this value and try to move off. So there's an error by default. So that's just pretty much a default error that's coming from the actual object because the iData Error Info set up that there's no like text string set up on that, so it's just a default iData Error Info implementation where it's just a required property from the underlying business object, and that's the default message if you don't have a string specifically set for it. However, I'm going to do this. So I'm going to click on this, and just by me checking the checkbox, the person that made this sample hard-coded a string in there that says something else now. So now when I go to it, it should say something else. Whoops. Let me start that. Go back in there and then delete that and move off. So now because the error has been fired again, now it's providing me, actually it's not a hard-coded string, it's like, hey, there is an error. So imagine that was written in code somewhere behind the scenes, and now that's what will show up. Now, in an enterprise app, the right way to do this would be, you should always first of all have an error string associated with your business objects, and done so in such a way where the error can be returned based on the locale. You want to think of internationalizing your business objects as well if you can, and in the UI as well. So this would be somewhere in a resource that would be localized for whatever country or machine has the locale set to. So, and again, we expose this on there as well on the grid, so you have flexibility to do so. So that's that feature. Let me jump to this one as well, the value list to Excel. Yeah, when I first saw this feature, Jason, I thought, hey, don't we have that feature? But no, I was mistaken because we've always had in an Excel API the ability for a developer to write code to have a drop-down list in Excel, in the Excel API, so that the automatically generated Excel file has a drop-down list. We took that a step further by automatically exporting that to that list from the grid, the Excel exporter. Yeah, and the thing is, I could go and delete all that code. I mean, it was like a couple, like maybe 20, 30 lines of code I had to write to flip through and do something, handling events and stuff. Yeah, and that's great because whenever, let's say, if I have my apps and I get fired or whatever, you know, someone else that takes over my code, they don't have to, they don't have, they don't have like, say, what's all this code that Tom wrote? So it's great. So it just happens automatically without them even knowing it. Yeah. So check this out. You have a grid sample. Let me move it over to the center so you can see it. Make it a little bit bigger, actually. So here's the grid, and this column happens to be a drop-down with a couple of values in there. Very simple. And I'm going to export this to Excel. I believe they have a process.start in there that will automatically fire the Excel file up for me. So, okay, there we go. It's exported. It's done. And I'm going to click OK. It should automatically launch. Should get the Excel file that shows up. Again, whenever I share my desktop, it's like my machine slows down by quite a large factor. Usually this will show up later while I'm talking about like another like web product or something. But essentially, whenever this pops up, it's just basically the drop-down list. Can I just do this real quick? Jump to it directly. It looks like it's just taking time for the process.start to do it. I might have 2 instances, but I just want to make sure I show everybody. Okay, so look, it's exported exactly like you saw the grid, so the styling is intact. And when I click on this, look, we have the drop-down list in there. So that's really cool. And again, if you have like a hierarchical grid with drop-downs all over the place, it will do that as well. So again, this is a nice feature. And again, whenever you can replace the code that you have written with Infragistics property settings, that's great. I mean, just like, I mean, you know, I made a joke before, but seriously, whenever I open up apps and there's less code in there, you know, it's deferred to the control where it makes sense. I mean, we implement logic and features in our controls where it makes sense for the control to handle that. We're not going to put anything in there that's not the responsibility of a control, but you know, we do put features in there that allow you to achieve your goals with just property settings or simple event handling. So I'm not going to say that. Okay, because I remember the older sample I launched, process.start, kicked it off. They may have changed that in the newer version of the sample I got. Okay, next thing I'll do is, let's do this alt day event thing. Show you that one real quick. Okay, so here it is. It loads up. Wow, that does look like Jason's calendar here. All these, wow. Wow. So Jason, you're building an application that represents your schedule, right? But then you noticed the controls limitations and you had this feature added. Yeah. All right, so let's check out some of these properties here. So we're going to put scroll buttons on there, and you notice when I set that property, it shows scroll buttons here. So I could flip through them here and there. So you can see how I can flip through all the different events that are there. Then you could set things like the preferred max height. So you could kind of change that if you want to. Yeah, you could iterate through them. And then I just double-clicked on one of them to show you that you can always get this form. I mean, a little bit off topic, but I love the scheduling controls because You throw these controls onto the form, then you use the Ultra Calendar Info component, which is your component that wires all of these guys together, and then this pop-up that shows up and a bunch of other pop-ups that show up. They're all just part of the controls. Like, could you imagine if you had to build all these from scratch? It'll take forever, but all these controls have dialogues, reminders, they have recurrence dialogues. All these things are built in, and all these controls are synchronized. So if you click on one control and navigate to one date, all of them will jump to that date as well. So it's really, really great. Even though this has been built a while ago, it's really amazing how you can create a really complex scheduling application, not even just for appointments or things of that nature, but I've seen people do stuff with process management as well. Because look, it's a calendar with stuff that happens on a date, and there's people that have like apps that require input that's time-oriented, like where I need to kick off a process, so they create a task. It's entered in this calendar-like UI that's like Outlook, and then guess what? It goes into a database, and then there's some app somewhere that scrapes the database and kicks off processes. So think of that as well for these controls. All right, let's take a look at now the Gantt control and the working arrow mode, because that's the one I wanted to explain to you as far as the permutations of setting those different units of time and how those units of time are represented in the chart portion of the control. And here it is loading up. And maximize this. All right, so here's the control. You should be able to see the different, there's only a couple of tasks going on here. Remember, this is hierarchical in nature because we have a task and its child tasks. We have the different chart representations here. So look at this here, right? Let's just focus on the bottom one. This task GUI design is just one day. And I'm going to use the little spin buttons to change it to 2 days or 3 days. So right now what's going on is just, things are set to, everything's set to auto adjust. Then there's also a thing called task drag increments. When you drag a task, it's 1 day at a time. See, it just went by 1 day, another day. So let's have some fun with these property settings pretty much. So that's days. Let's set this to hours. If I do this to hours, now everything is changed here. So I have to kind of change things around a little bit on the UI. But notice here how these are all hours now. So and then when I drag a task, it's like 1 day. So let me just find the end of this here. If I go to the end of it, notice how because it's 72 hours. I mean, I could change this in increments and decrements, hour at a time. So that's one of the things that you can do here. But I could also change, the task drag increment to 1 day. I mean, it could be minutes, days. The other thing is when you set things to manual, you have to basically designate or code the different types of increment from the actual grid portion of it versus the chart version. So again, to make a long story short, you have so many different options here. You have to just find which one fits best. Like for example, auto adjust will automatically adjust, it'll synchronize the grid with the chart. You also have the span, which the task duration, for example, you want to work on micromanaging stuff like, okay, well, I want to spend 3,000 minutes on it or 30 minutes. You could just type that in here. But you get the idea. I mean, we didn't want to lock you down and set it up so it's just, hard-coded for days only. So that's the thing that we've done. So the timeline positioning synchronized with the grid time span has been updated, if that made sense. All right, so what I'll do is, I'm going to show you some of these examples of touch-enabled controls, but I'm going to spend a little time in Visual Studio, so let me try and kick through these real quick and leave a few minutes for questions and answers. So I just wanted to give you guys a look at what these controls look like in a touch device. So these are all the tab controls. So here it is. So it's touch is enabled, touch is not enabled, touch is enabled, touch is not enabled. That's how it works. That'll show you in Visual Studio. So the tabs, notice they're bigger. I'm actually using a laptop that does not have touch, but that's how it works. That's what it looks like on the tab controls. Same thing with the next and previous. If you have a million tabs on your form, you can still touch these previous and next buttons as well. Let me enable some other things here. So I have the close button, so you can still tap this one, touch this one, close it. And let's change around different pages. So this is like the note pages where it's supposed to kind of look like you're flipping through the pages of a book. And notice how I actually am going through the different tab pages. I'm on tab 10, tab 11. It's kind of like I'm flipping through pages of a book. And if I go to note page flat, that is just note page flat. That's the plain old tab. That's the entire tab control that has content area, but the tab strip is just a strip of tabs only, which is meant to be used for pretty much data binding scenarios. That's the tabs. Let's take a look at the editors and the grid sample, and then I'll look at the tree view last. Then we'll jump into some Visual Studio. And here we go. These are all the different controls. Okay, so remember, these are the editors I had pictures of before. So let's enable all these things. So again, the ink, wow, let me see if I press this, what happens, the ink button. And I should get it. This is the pip right here. Wow, I haven't seen this in a while. So the pip, I can draw stuff like hello. And it thinks it says the. But again, that's deferring it to the operating system's recognition capabilities. So that's enabled. But again, we have touch enabled. That's touch not enabled. So it's just a property setting directly on the touch components. So I'll show you that one in Visual Studio. So it just makes everything bigger so you can get your fingers in there and touch things. And finally, the list view and the tree view. One of the things I wanted to show you and talk about a little bit in Visual Studio is I want to talk a little bit about testing and what Infragistics has done, because I've been getting a lot of questions about testing, about the Microsoft testing framework, the coded UI stuff, and we also have products that we sell called Test Advantage. I want to kind of clarify that because there's a lot of stuff I get from customers. I want to make sure I communicate that with people out there. Okay, so here's the list view and the tree view. So let's see, this is the list view. See everything is larger. This is what it looks like when it's smaller. But here the scroll bars are fatter. Let's enable checkboxes here. So if I change the different views, how you could change views in the list view from details view to icon view. So touch is not enabled, touch is now enabled. Even though some of the elements may not change in size, we're spacing them apart so that you can get a finger in there and tap it so that yeah, I mean, if there's like I remember thinking, how am I going to get my finger in there? Like I need a toothpick. Yeah. But that's all they do. They just space it apart. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's a good thing even Microsoft didn't do anything crazy. Like, they spaced things apart. Tap. I don't accidentally, like if I'm on like trying to select stuff from Netflix, I select movies I'd never wanted to watch by accident. Yeah. Okay, so here's the grid. So the different styles. So touch is enabled, touch is not enabled. So when we enable touch again, we're in free form. We're in grid mode. Remember grid mode that I talked about where we have each object in the collection at the same level can have a different schema. So here's movies. This actually happens to have the same schema, by the way it's set up. But that's how you see that. So just different node styles back when I'm in standard mode. Again, different radio buttons. So you get the idea. You want to touch enable your app? Well, place the component on the form and make sure that the property to enable touch is set to true, and it does that. And you can programmatically turn it on or off, or what you can do is you could even expose this to your end users with a checkbox, and then make this like a persisted property on like one of your, on your settings. Make that a persisted property so that even if it's touch or not touch, it doesn't matter. Maybe the end user likes the bigger view, even if he doesn't have a touch device. So you should enable this for them as well. All right, so wow, the time is ticking. So what I will do now is let's take a look at Visual Studio. I have it loaded up here beforehand. All right, a couple of things I wanted to talk about, testing, and I want to show you some stuff too. Real quick, this is not a complex app, even though there's a couple of components I threw down here. We have a WinGrid, and we have the Infragistics toolbar manager component with one toolbar and a bunch of buttons in there. And then a couple of other things I threw in there just for fun, for giggles. I have the Infragistics Excel exporter. And look, I have the touch provider. And now when I go to the toolbox, Visual Studio toolbox, this is the 13.1 for CLR4. Remember, we don't build for the earlier CLRs. Common Language Runtime 4, that's all we build for now. So keep that in mind. If you have like an app that's much older and it's like CLR2 or anything older like that, and if you want to upgrade, make sure that you make sure that you keep in mind that you're going to move everything over to CLR4. All these assemblies are compiled onto that on that CLR. So scroll down, just look at. I mean, every time I look at this, like it keeps growing and growing. It's an enormous amount of tools, and it's great because you have more tools in your toolbox. I mean, imagine if like I wanted to rebuild a home and I only had like 5 tools. What kind of work can I do there? I want all the tools. I want a Home Depot in my garage, I want everything available, and that's what you get with the Windows Forms control set. And if you scroll down all the way down here, look for Ultra Touch. There we go. The Ultra Touch provider, there it is. You double-click it, and it ends up right here. And even through the Smart tag, it's enabled or not enabled. See, it's enabled, not enabled, back and forth, back and forth. All right, but talk about testing, which is the point of why I wanted to do this. You want to test your Windows Forms apps. There's quite a few options out there. Microsoft has built a testing framework within the ultimate version of Visual Studio, which is what I have. And what you can do is you can add a testing project, which is what I did here. So for example, make believe this is just my typical Windows Forms app, which is just a simple form and some other stuff, nothing crazy. What you do is you right-click on the solution and you add a new project, and you want to choose this guy right here. So test projects, this guy right here. I want to add a test project, and I just named it the same thing as my regular app, my regular project, but with the word test on it. I mean, there's different type of naming conventions you guys out there might be using for your company's testing scenarios, whatever. Just follow the same thing. I just made a very simple app. And then, now to talk about it, this is a free testing framework that comes with the ultimate version of Visual Studio Ultimate. And again, it's kind of a simplified testing that provides automated recording and playback capabilities. Now, Infragistics has built within however the testing framework works and whatever it exposes, we've built some of our controls, or pretty much most of them, to work within this framework. And I'll show you pretty much, I'll do a quick demo of how it works. But another thing that I wanted to say is that there's other options as well. Your company may have purchased something like Mercury Quick Test Pro or Rational Functional Tester, which there's a big difference when you're doing the testing that I'm talking about now with the built-in Visual Studio automated testing versus something like QTP or RFT. There's a major difference. It's larger. It's much more granular. It's more more complicated, more complex. But again, Visual Studio built-in testing, I want to say that's a simpler. If you can get by with that, if that helps you achieve your testing goals, then great. Run with that. But again, you want more complex testing, more serious testing. QTP or RFT are the way to go. And for that to work, you'll have to buy separate products that Infragistics sells. Infragistics Test Advantage for those products. But anyway, as we're ticking away on time, let me show you how the Visual Studio automated testing works. So I'm going to go to my test app, right? Well, first what I'm going to do is, you want to make sure your executable is already running outside of Visual Studio. You can navigate to the exe, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start it without debugging. So I'm actually launching the app outside of Visual Studio. It's not even attached to it. And one that I just want to make sure my app is up and running first. And it's going to load up here somewhere. There it is, very simple. I'm not even going to move it. I'm just going to leave it where it is. It's just a Windows Forms grid, and it's Infragistics WinGrid with filtering and a bunch of other stuff enabled. All right. So next, what I'll do is I'm going to now go to Visual Studio. I'm going to right-click the test app. I'm going to add a coded UI test. Let me add that. That's going to do a couple of things automatically. First, what it does is pops up this UI that's going to actually bring up another little UI. But first of all, it adds the Infragistics coded UI test. Notice how there's two assemblies, version 12.2 and 13.1. It's hard for Infragistics, based on the Visual Studio and coded UI APIs that we're provided with, to make a distinction with that, from what the developers told me. But we do check the version, so we're only using the 13.1 because I'm using 13.1 assembly. So I talked to the developers before. They said there's no problem. Don't worry about that. Now, make sure that gets added automatically. And the work that Infragistics has done is in these assemblies that are added. So that's what gives the magic to coded UI so that it works with the Infragistics controls. I'm going to record an action now. Ready? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click OK. And let me just get some of these things out of the way. And there's my Starship Enterprise picture. I'm waiting for this UI here. That's the Enterprise E, by the way. It's my favorite. The Enterprise E, yeah. The Sovereign class, yeah. Yeah. They actually made a toy of that recently, like the Diamond Select toys, and it's really awesome. Yeah, it's on Amazon. Yeah. Like quantum torpedoes, the best. You can't mess with those. All right, so this little UI thing that pops up, this is where everything happens, right? So I'm going to click the record button. Give it a few seconds, and then it should be good now. Now what I'm going to do is, wow, so I'm sharing my desktop, and I'm running a recording thing. So I have to, give it a chance for the mouse to move now. Oh, there you go. So now I click on this, and see how it says currently recording? It's recording that. I'm going to do something very simple. Let's sort it. You see how slow it is, right? So then, because my screen is sharing and recording. Recording your screen is recording an app interaction is pretty intense. So there you go. I just sorted it twice. Sort it again. And that's it. Just keep it simple for now. I'm going to stop and generate code, and I'm going to call this sort test. I'm going to show you a couple of other things as quick as I can, even if we go over like a few seconds. So it's generating code. It's going to throw that. It added a class for me, and in that class is where the action takes place. So I'm going to close this because I'm done for now. And the other thing that happened is it added, what is that? The sort test. It added this method, but if I right-click and go to the definition, it added a bunch of stuff. So there you go. And by the way, one of the major differences between this Microsoft testing framework and QTP and RFT is what it uses. Like, I'm moving my mouse and clicking on stuff. How is it recording that? Well, this Microsoft version is using the accessibility objects that are available in Windows, and it's recording click coordinates. That's how it's doing this. Now, it's very different than when you're using Test Advantage with QTP or RFT, where there's direct links to the objects in the object hierarchy. Very different. What that means is that if I move my app like 1 pixel over, the test is broken. So keep that in mind. All right. So now, how do I test this now? So what I do is I go back to this method, right-click, and run test. See right here, run test. I right-click and click on that, and give it a few seconds. And when it does, it automatically plays back the recordings that I did. So see how it automatically popped that up for me? So it should automatically sort, and look, it worked, and test completed. Now, of course, you could do a little bit more complex tests, but always keep in mind the click coordinates that comes with limitations. And it passed. Now, if it fails, what happens? Well, you get a report saying this broke, and So in theory, the way it works is developers build the apps, they hand it over to testers. Testers execute the tests that they created beforehand to go through the use cases, and they run the test. If it works, it's great. Next, the developers may make changes to the code base and they compile a new build. And guess what? They give you the new build, and you just execute the test again. That's how you do automated testing. Without automated testing, we'd have to have a bunch of people sitting in like what looks like a sweatshop, clicking buttons all day, like making sure that all your scenarios are done. That's expensive. It's not that fun. It's pretty monotonous. Let a computer do it. But again, you have one option, but you also have the option of getting test advantage with Mercury QTP. And our controls support all of the other things, such as, like for example, if I could show this will be the last thing I show. But if I were to do this again, we support like assertions as well. So if I right-click and add a coded UI test to bring up that little dialog again, so just bring it up again, no big deal. And there's a little dialog. It should pop up any minute. So if you hold on to this little crosshairs thing right here, I'm going to click it, hold it. I'm holding it, and I'm going to drag it onto this one cell. So right there, I'm going to let it go. It brings up the assertion builder or assertion editor, whatever you want to call it. Now remember, this is not like, I'm sorry if I keep saying this, but it's not like QTP or RFT. We could totally dig to the very depths of the control and get absolute all Visual Studio-based properties. You can't do that here. You can only get what's accessible. And look, I can only access the text property. So I click on text, and I say I want to make sure that that's what I want to test for. I'm going to add the assertion, and I'm making sure that is equal to Walza, if I said that right. And then I'm done. I get out of here, and it's going to say, how about and that's going to add a line of code that tests to make sure it equals to that. That's what the built-in Visual Studio testing is, and the Infragistics controls. I want to say like 90% of their functionality, maybe like 85% functionality, work within that testing framework. And that's what I wanted to show everybody.